I want to talk to you today about some things regarding Pentecost, an amazing day in the life of the church. But before I begin there, I want to tell you about um, how excited I was to join the Cub Scouts back in the early 70s. And for you young people, that, yes, is in the 1900s, if you can believe it. But I was so excited to be part of the Cub Scouts. And what was really thrilling was that I was going to march in a Memorial Day parade in Roseville, Michigan. It was an amazing thing. And I was so excited to put on that blue uniform and the cap and the scarf thing. And it was just going to be the most thrilling thing. And I had this really sharp outfit. But it was so blazing hot that day, a very, very unusually hot day in Roseville, Michigan. And my mom, along with other den mothers, decided that our den would wear something a little cooler, but still an official part of the Cub Scout uniform. So we had to wear these t-shirts. And I remember I just was so disappointed that I couldn't wear my blue uniform. But anyway, the day was great. It was so sunny, so hot. I don't even know what the temperature was, but we were on the pavement marching, and we were there with Troop 1439 out of Roseville, Michigan, Bethlehem Lutheran Church, and Mr. Sweetland, our scoutmaster. He was a scoutmaster over the whole troop. The Boy Scouts, the Cub Scouts, everything. I remember what a man he was. He marched, and he kept us marching, and he kept looking down the side, making sure we were all in line, and we were so good at our marching. But we finally made it to City Hall, and I had no idea what to expect at City Hall. I'd never been to a Memorial Day festivity. And so speaker after speaker got up there, and it was just so much going on that I couldn't see. I was confused. I was a short little guy, and so I kept trying to see what was going on, and all it was a bunch of speakers until I heard, "Ready, aim, fire." I heard gunshots, and I saw the soldiers with guns shooting. And talk about bad timing. Mr. Sweetland's son, Jimmy, who had a terrible limp, had been overcome by the heat. And after the third volley, Mr. Sweetland was carrying the fainted son back from the front where I couldn't see. And the only thing that went through my mind is, they're shooting Cub Scouts. I had no idea. What was that? I didn't understand what was going on. And I think that's a lot of what happened on Pentecost. Not that we were surprised by gunshots, but something was going on that the people said, "What is it that's going on? I don't get it. I don't get it." A big boom. A transformer that goes off and blows during a storm, a crash in the kitchen, a dog barking at the middle of the night. You say, "What was that? What was that?" Well, that's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about with Pentecost. See, God interrupted the ordinary with something that they had not experienced, something truly amazing. Something that would make the whole world stop and say, "What was that?" Now, Pentecost actually started a long time ago. People think that the day of Pentecost was the only time the Holy Spirit had been poured out. But we heard in our Old Testament lesson an amazing story about how God had asked Moses to assemble some of the elders of the people. And they were specific ones that were picked out. Among them were Eldad and Medad. They were part of the group that was selected to be part of the outpouring of the Spirit. But they did not go to the gathering. They did not follow the directions. In fact, they were back at camp. And when the Holy Spirit was poured out on the elders, Eldad and Medad began prophesying in the camp. And word of this came by a young man who ran to the assembly of elders and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua said, oh, Moses, we better stop that. They're not following the rules. That wasn't the approved place, but the Spirit fell on them too. And Moses said, I wish that all God's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his Spirit on all of them. You see, the Spirit is not containable. Like the wind, it blows where it wants to blow. And God had already preordained that Eldad and Medad would do that very thing that they did. So it's not limited. The Spirit is not limited to a tent or a building or a certain location or a certain time. Just as much as you could try to rein in the wind and say, we're only going to have the wind blow on Tuesday afternoon from about 3 to 5. But you can't do that. That's ridiculous. So the Holy Spirit sometimes jumps the fence, so to speak. There's nothing that can hold the Spirit back. David, the psalmist, talked about how the Spirit comes to the humble, and we read that in our psalm today. It's the posture of the heart at Pentecost. He says, to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. Show me your ways. Show me your ways. Lead the humble in what is right. So Pentecost is not about the spiritual elites. It's not about the most educated, the most polished. It's not about the most prepared. It's about the humble, those whose hearts and lives are open to what God would do, those who wait on the Lord, who say, teach me, teach me. See, Pentecost is not earned, it's received. Well, then the big what is it? The Spirit breaks loose on the day of Pentecost. And so now we come to the moment that just shook Jerusalem. Disciples were together in one place and they're praying, they're waiting, and they're doing exactly what Jesus told them to do. And then a sound, not a whisper, not a gentle breeze, not a quiet stirring. Luke says that it was the sound of a blowing, violent wind. It filled the whole house. It spilled into the streets. It attracted a crowd. People came running from every direction with the same question, what was that? Then they saw fire, not destructive fire, but holy fire, resting on each disciple. Then they heard something even stranger. Galileans, speaking every language under heaven, not babbling, not mumbling, not guessing, but speaking clearly, speaking fluently, speaking truth. So the crowd, which were Jews from every nation, stood there stunned. We hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Some were amazed, some were confused, some were even cynical, but everyone agreed on one thing. Something happened that they couldn't explain, something they couldn't ignore, something that demanded a response. Pentecost is breaking the sound barrier, the language barrier. And it was amazing what the Spirit was enabling people to do. Here's an interesting picture. This is still going on in Jerusalem today. Back in Jesus' day, it was going on back then. It's called the Festival of Booths, or Shavuot, what the Jewish people call it, where for 1 week the people are required to live outside of their homes in tents or in booths. The gospel lesson happened when Jesus was in Jerusalem during the Festival of Booths. So during that festival, on the last day, Jesus said something about the Holy Spirit. It was something that he told them back then that came to be at Pentecost. So Pentecost didn't come out of nowhere. Jesus already stood up and said, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, out of their heart will flow rivers of living water." And then John explains that. He says, by this, he meant the Spirit. Jesus promised a day when the Holy Spirit would not just visit God's people, but flow through them. Absolutely amazing. Not a trickle, not a drip, not a polite little stream of the Spirit, but rivers, rivers that refresh, rivers that cleanse, rivers that carry life wherever they go. And Pentecost is the fulfillment of Jesus' promise. Living water poured out, overflowing, living water unleashed. Last week, I mentioned a little something about the Welsh revival, and I watched a documentary or two on it over the past week and learned something very interesting about that revival that swept through Wales in 1904 and 1905. Something happened that the newspapers around the world struggled to describe. It wasn't organized, it wasn't planned, it wasn't led by committees or strategies. It was a Pentecost-like eruption of the Holy Spirit. And remember, I showed you the picture of that little church that it came from? It was a little church. A little church. Do we know little churches? Do we know little churches with Christian people in them? Well, I'll tell you what. This revival started in a little church, and it spread. The most astonishing reports came from the coal mines. This is really interesting. The coal miners were a rough bunch of people. And as revival spread, believe it or not, the coal miners began confessing sins, reconciling with enemies, singing hymns underground. These hardened men who never shed a tear were suddenly weeping and praying and praising. But here's the part that made the whole nation say, "What was that?" The pit ponies, the small horses that pulled coal carts, stopped working. That was something. What was that? Because the miners had stopped cursing. For years, the ponies had been trained to respond to harsh commands, shouted profanity in angry tones. When the men were transformed, their language changed and their hearts softened. When the Spirit took hold, the ponies didn't recognize their new voices at all. The animals literally did not know what to do. And so the newspapers reported it as a curiosity. Skeptics laughed. Believers nodded knowingly, but because when the Spirit moves, even the whole creation knows, and creatures know. Creatures know the Holy Spirit. The revival historian J. Edwin Orr wrote that the entire nation was brought to a standstill by a power no one could explain. That's Pentecost. The Spirit breaks into ordinary life so powerfully that even the coal mines feel it. Even the animals feel it. Even the newspapers have to ask, what was that? So that becomes our question as well. The crowd's question, it's our question too. What does this mean? It's a Lutheran question. Luther wrote that all over the small catechism. What does this mean? And that's the right question. What does it mean when the Spirit falls? What does it mean when God interrupts? What does it mean when the church becomes a place of holy surprise? It means God is not finished. The story is not over, folks. St. Paul Lutheran Church is part of God's story. And the story is still being told, and we have a part in that story. What does it mean? It means that God is not distant. He's near. God is not predictable. He's not limited to our plans or our structures or our comfort zones. Pentecost means the Spirit is still jumping fences like Eldad and Medad. Pentecost means that the humble still receive guidance like David. Pentecost means that the wind still blows and the fire still falls. Pentecost means that Jesus still pours out living water on thirsty people. Oh, brothers and sisters, I hope you are thirsty when you come into the presence of God. I hope you are thirsty enough to say, I want a drink of that living water. Pentecost means that a church is not a museum, nor is it a historic, beautiful little chapel on a hill. Pentecost means a movement, and it's a movement that we are called to be a part of. So, what would make Brenham say, what was that? What would it look like for the Spirit to move in such a way that Brenham, Chapel Hill, Belleville, and the countryside around us would stop and say, what was that? Maybe it's a reconciliation nobody thought was possible, a healing that defies explanation, a revival of prayer among people, among teenagers, among children, a surge of generosity that shocks the community, a worship service where people sense God's presence so strongly they can't describe it, a church so full of love that outsiders say, we've never seen anything like that. Pentecost is not a memory. Pentecost is a movement. Pentecost is not a story that we admire. Pentecost is a power we receive. So what happens? The Spirit is still saying, watch this. What was that? God answers, that was me. That was my power. That was my presence. That was my promise. That was my Spirit poured out on all flesh. Pentecost is God saying to the church, stand back, open your hands, lift up your soul, and watch what I can do.